Have you ever been looked down upon, judged by your uniform, your calloused hands, the way you stand in a room where you don't seem to belong? Now imagine this: the person mocking you has no idea that by sunrise, their future will rest in your hands. That's where our story begins. The Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it doesn't need a sign. Its walls hum with quiet money. The lighting is soft golden, designed to flatter those who already live under the glow of privilege. Silverware doesn't clatter here. It whispers, as if even the cutlery knows to be discreet. Conversations are hushed laughter, delicate as though joy itself has been trained not to disturb. And in this cathedral of wealth and silence moves Ella Morgan. She wears a crisp black uniform that erases identity, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun. To the diners, she is invisible, just a pair of steady hands, a polite "yes, sir," a fleeting shadow that refills a glass and vanishes again. But tonight, those hands will be noticed. At table 7, the most coveted booth in the house, sits Richard Hale. In his 40s, broad-shouldered, still handsome, but with the weary eyes of a man who carries an empire. He is the CEO of HaleTech, a company built on the bones of innovation, yet wobbling under the pressure of investors. Richard carries the charm of a practiced leader, easy smile, pleasant voice. But beneath it lies exhaustion. Across from him, commanding the table with her laugh, sharp enough to cut glass, is Vanessa Price. She's stunning in a way that demands attention, her designer bracelet catching the light as though it knows it's part of the performance. Vanessa wasn't born into wealth, but she wears it now like armor, too loud, too tight, desperate to prove she belongs. And the easiest way to do that, by belittling those who serve her. Ella approaches with a bottle of vintage Cabernet worth more than a month of her waitress wages. Her steps are measured, her hands steady. "Mr. Hale, Ms. Price," she says softly, presenting the wine. Richard nods with polite indifference. But Vanessa leans forward, her smile curled with cruelty. "Richard," she says in a voice pitched high enough for nearby tables to hear, "look at her hands. Do you think she even knows the first thing about a wine like this? She probably thinks vintage means something you pick up at a thrift shop." A ripple of discomfort passes through the tables around them. Richard shifts uneasy, but says nothing. Ella's expression doesn't falter. She has perfected the mask of deference, neutral, calm, untouchable. But inside, her stomach tightens. "Shall I proceed with the pour?" she asks evenly. Vanessa smirks, eyes glinting like a predator's. "Yes, darling. Let's hope you don't spill it. It's worth more than her entire apartment, I'm sure." As Ella begins to pour, Vanessa makes her move. A subtle kick of her stiletto heel nudges the edge of the small service table. The bottle tilts, the liquid arcs. A splash of ruby wine lands squarely on Vanessa's white silk blouse. Gasps break the restaurant's fragile calm. Vanessa shrieks, rising to her feet in theatrical horror. "You clumsy idiot," she cries, holding up the stain like a battle wound. "Do you have any idea what you've ruined? This blouse cost $12,000. All eyes turn. Richard fumbles with a napkin, dabbing, uselessly mortified, but still silent. The manager hurries forward, apologizing. Vanessa isn't finished. Her voice grows louder, sharp enough to slice through the restaurant's silence. "I want her fired. Right now. In front of everyone. That's the only way she'll learn her place." The words hang heavy in the air, cruel and final. Ella stands motionless, her grip still tight on the bottle, her jaw set. She meets Vanessa's eyes, not with tears, not with rage, but with something quieter, more dangerous resolve. "Shall I take a short break, sir?" she asks the manager calmly. He nods quickly, flustered, desperate to restore order. Ella turns, walks toward the kitchen with her back straightened, her steps unwavering. The audience doesn't see the storm in her chest, the fury, the humiliation, the betrayal of silence from Richard Hale himself. They see only dignity carried like armor. But in that silence, something has begun to burn. By morning, the same woman dismissed as a nobody will walk into a different room, a boardroom, and reveal just how wrong Vanessa Price was. That night, Ella Morgan does not return to the modest one-bedroom rental where she is supposed to live. Instead, her taxi glides past the familiar downtown blocks and pulls into the private entrance of a skyscraper on Central Park's south. An elevator secured by fingerprint and key code carries her silently upward until the doors slide open into a space very few people on Earth have ever seen, her true home. The penthouse is a cathedral of glass and steel, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan like a living painting. The city sprawls beneath her in a sea of light, restless and endless. The place has always felt less like a home and more like a museum, curated to perfection, modern furniture in quiet grays and whites, expensive art chosen by decorators, not by her parents' hands. For years, Ella felt like a ghost inside these walls. Tonight, the emptiness feels like armor. Waiting for her in the study is Samuel Kensington. Silver-haired, impeccably dressed, he carries the air of an old-world lawyer and trusted friend. He was her father's closest confidant, and since their deaths, he has become something more, a guardian of both her inheritance and her conscience. A tumbler of scotch rests in his hand, a stack of files on the marble table before him. His sharp blue eyes soften as he sees her enter the black waitress uniform, still clinging to her like borrowed skin. "Welcome home, Ella," he says quietly. She exhales the facade of the server slipping away. She loosens the knot of her hair, letting dark waves fall over her shoulders, reclaiming herself. For 6 months, she is hidden behind the mask of Ellie the anonymous waitress. Few knew the truth that she is the only daughter of Robert and Catherine Morgan pioneers who laid the foundation of modern data security. Their company, Morgan Cybernetics, was acquired by HaleTech in a blockbuster deal that made headlines a decade earlier. That acquisition enriched the family beyond measure, but 2 years ago, a sailing accident took her parents away, leaving Ella with not only their fortune, but also their legacy. Through a maze of trusts and holding companies, one name stands at the heart Everest Capital. Under that shield of anonymity, Ella controls 15% of HaleTech, enough to make her one of the most powerful shareholders in the room. Only Samuel knows. She drops into a leather chair opposite him, the exhaustion of the night finally showing in the slump of her shoulders. "I wanted to understand," she says softly. "Not the numbers, not the quarterly report's life. The kind my parents had to fight their way through before success. I wanted to know what it felt like to stand on my feet all night, to live on tips to be ignored. 6 months of it, Samuel. 6 months of listening to what people say when they think no one important is listening." Her eyes darken, remembering Vanessa Price's cruel words, the deliberate humiliation in front of Richard Hale, the silence that followed. "But tonight, I saw the rot from the inside. Not in the company, but in the people orbiting it. The arrogance, the emptiness. I think I've had enough." Samuel leans forward, setting the glass down. His voice drops into something harder, colder. "I was hoping you would say that. Because time has run out." He slides a folder across the table. Ella flips it open. Charts, names, legal filings. The neat handwriting of Samuel's annotations in the margins. Harold Shaw. Samuel says, his tone edged with contempt. A corporate raider of the old guard. He's been buying up HaleTech shares through shell companies. Our intelligence says he's working proxies on the board already. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp, he intends to make his move. If he succeeds, the company your parents built the patents, the research, the soul of it will be gutted and sold for parts. The words hit Ella like cold steel. She stares down at the documents, then out at the glittering skyline. For years, she thought the fortune was a cage keeping her from reality. Tonight, she realizes it's also a weapon, and one she can no longer afford to leave sheathed. She closes the folder, her voice steady now. Then tomorrow morning we stop him. Samuel studies her for a moment, then nods, once satisfied. For the first time in months, Ella Morgan isn't a ghost hiding in the shadows. She is her parents' daughter. And the fight has only just begun. Morning sunlight poured like molten gold across the glass and steel facade of HaleTech Tower. 40 floors above the city, the boardroom was already filling mahogany table polished to a mirror leather chairs occupied by men and women who carried entire industries in their portfolios. Their voices were low-clipped, the air thick with rumors of upheaval. Everyone knew something was coming. At the head of the table sat a Richard Hale. His suit was pressed, his tie perfect, but his eyes betrayed the strain of a sleepless night. He tried to project composure, but the truth was clear. He felt unprepared. HaleTech was his inheritance, his father's empire, yet it now trembled beneath the weight of predators. And among them, Harold Shaw's shadow loomed the largest. The chairman, Marcus Thorne, cleared his throat, shuffling his notes. We'll begin in a moment. Let's allow the last members to. The double doors opened. A hush swept the room. Inside stepped Samuel Kensington, steady as ever, his presence alone commanding respect. But it was the woman at his side who drew every gaze. Ella Morgan. Gone was the plain black uniform, the severe bun, the anonymity of service. In its place, a navy Tom Ford suit, tailored to perfection, sharp heels clicking against marble. Her hair fell loose in sleek waves across her shoulders, her face calm, unshakable. She moved with quiet authority, not the deferential glide of a waitress, but the measured stride of someone who belonged, who commanded. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The executives glanced at each other in confusion, whispers catching like sparks. And then from the back of the room came a laugh. Vanessa Price. She'd insisted on attending perched in her designer dress, like a queen consort guarding her claim. Her laugh was sharp, brittle. "My God, Richard," she said loudly enough for all to hear. "They'll let anyone in here, won't they? Is the catering staff here to give a presentations?" A ripple of uneasy chuckles from a few allies. Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes, however, were fixed on Ella, confusion dawning into something darker. Recognition. Samuel didn't flinch. He placed a hand lightly on Ella's shoulder, then addressed the chairman. His voice carried with it the weight of a verdict. "Mr. Thorne, gentlemen, ladies, my apologies for the late arrival. Allow me to introduce my associate. You know her in the ledgers as the principal of Everest Capital, the holder of a 15% stake in HaleTech. But today, you will know her by name. This is Ms. Ella Morgan." The silence broke like glass. Gasps, sharp intakes of breath, a rustle of papers as stunned board members turned to each other. Richard Hale froze, his face draining of color. He stared at her as if the world had tilted. The waitress, the woman from last night, the one he had watched suffer in silence while Vanessa mocked her. He had pitied her, even dismissed her, and now she stood revealed as his second largest shareholder. Vanessa's smirk faltered. Her hand twitched at her bracelet, her confidence unraveling. She whispered, almost choking on the words, "That's impossible. She poured our wine." But the chairman was already rising, his face flushed, his voice measured. "Ms. Morgan, this is an unexpected honor. We had no idea you took an active interest in HaleTech's affairs." Ella's eyes swept the room, calm, assessing utterly without fear. "My interest has always been active, Mr. Thorne," she said evenly. "Until now it has been silent." Her gaze flickered just for a second toward Richard Hale. "But recent events have convinced me that silence is no longer an option." Every word landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward. Around the table, the titans of industry who had walked in so confident. now leaned forward, caught between awe and unease. In the corner, Vanessa Price sat pale and stricken, her smugness shattered into disbelief, and Richard Hale, his heart thundered with shame. He saw in that moment not just a shareholder, but the quiet dignity he had ignored the night before. A waitress, no, a force. The boardroom had become a theater, and Ella Morgan had just rewritten the script. The heavy doors opened again, and with them came the storm. Harold Shaw strode in as if he owned the place already. Tall, broad, with a predator's grin, he carried himself like a man who had devoured companies before breakfast and was ready for another meal. Behind him followed a team of attorneys in dark suits, arms weighed down with folders and leather cases. Their presence felt like an invasion. "Am I late?" Shaw's voice carried across the room, oily and amused. "Or just in time for the fireworks." The chairman stiffened. "Mr. Shaw, you are not on this board. You have no standing here." Shaw laid a folder on the table with a loud, deliberate thump. "On the contrary, Mr. Thorne. With proxies secured from several of your members, I believe I have more than enough standing to be heard. Gentlemen, ladies, let's discuss HaleTech's future. Under new leadership, the air in the room tightened. Richard Hale sat rigid, his face pale. He had feared this moment, but even so, Shaw's confidence was suffocating. Around the table, members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting toward one another. Doubt was spreading. But before Shaw could continue, a voice cut through the tension, measured, calm, surgical. "Mr. Shaw," Ella Morgan said. Every head turned. She had not raised her voice, but the authority in it commanded silence. She sat perfectly poised, one hand resting on the file Samuel had placed before her, the other folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes were steady, cold as glass. "You speak of HaleTech's future," she began. "Let's start with its present." She rose to her feet, every movement precise, deliberate. From the folder, she withdrew a thin stack of document sales figures, engineering reports, exit interviews. She walked slowly as she spoke, her voice carrying like the steady strike of a bell. "For the past 3 years, HaleTech has chased quarterly gains at the expense of innovation. Marketing budgets increased by 30%, while research and development fell by nearly half. In the last 12 months alone, 7 senior engineers have resigned, each citing the same reason: lack of vision and lack of support." The board members shifted uneasily. She had their attention. Ella continued her words, scalpel sharp. "Customer satisfaction scores have dropped. Product launches have been delayed. Competitors are outpacing us. This is not rumor or speculation, Mr. Shaw. These are facts. Your so-called new direction would not save this company. It would finish killing it." Shaw's smile faltered just for an instant. Then it returned, sharper, crueler. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain. Spoken like a little girl playing business. "You think numbers and a last name make you ready for this table? This is a battlefield, Miss Morgan, and you are out of your depth." The insult hung in the air. Some of the older board members frowned, others looked away. Richard Hale felt his stomach twist. He had thought the same not 24 hours ago. But Ella didn't flinch. She met Shaw's sneer with a steady gaze that carried the weight of her father's legacy and her own unshakable resolve. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Shaw," she said coolly. "This is a battlefield. But unlike you, I am not here to strip this company for parts. I am here to protect it, to rebuild it." She placed her documents flat on the table, her voice now ringing with icy clarity. "I hold 15% of this company through Everest Capital. I have alliances with members loyal to my father's vision. Combined, we represent a voting bloc strong enough to decide HaleTech's fate. So, no, Mr. Shaw, I am not out of my depth. I am exactly where I need to be." A hush fell over the room. Board members leaned in, captivated. Samuel Kensington watched her with the faintest flicker of pride. Shaw's grin collapsed into a scowl. The predator had been challenged, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. The tension swelled like a held breath, the entire future of HaleTech balanced on the next decision. A vote was coming, and every man and woman in that room knew it. The boardroom air felt heavy-charged, as though the walls themselves were bracing for impact. The vote loomed. Every hand at the table would soon decide HaleTech's future. Harold Shaw leaned back in his chair, his legal team smirking as if the outcome were already theirs. But Ella Morgan wasn't finished. Before we proceed, she said, her tone crisp, unyielding. There is one more matter, something that cannot wait. Her words froze the room. She reached into her folder and laid out a fresh set of documents across the polished mahogany. Pages thick with highlighted transfers, timestamps, corporate shells that looked ordinary until you followed the trail. For months, Shaw's strategy has been informed, too informed. He has known which projects were delayed, which divisions underperformed, which board members were restless. Information only someone inside this room could provide. A ripple of unease passed across the faces at the table. Fingers tightened on pens. Glances darted. Suspicion began to seep like poison into the air. Ella let the silence work a moment longer. Then she placed her hand on a single sheet. My investigators traced a series of offshore transactions. Payments routed through shell corporations registered in the Caribbean, originating from one of Shaw's holding companies. She slid the paper forward with a steady hand. And they terminate here into an account belonging to board member Charles Davies. The room erupted. Voices collided. Chairs scraped. Lies, Charles exploded, half rising from his seat. His face turned crimson, his voice cracking under the strain. This is an outrageous fabrication. I have given my life to this company, you dare. But Ella didn't flinch. She tapped the document, once a clean, precise gesture. The last deposit, $2 million, arrived yesterday morning. Under your wife's maiden name. The color drained from his face. His denial faltered, mouth opening and closing without sound. He looked around the table, searching for allies, for anyone willing to defend him. But all he saw were cold stares, disappointment, fury. Even Richard Hale, the man who had once called him a friend, stared back with disbelief and hurt. Charles, Richard said hoarsely, "After everything?" Charles tried again, but the words collapsed into silence. The evidence lay there, undeniable, glowing like a brand upon his reputation. The chairman's gavel struck the table. Enough. Mr. Davies, you are hereby suspended pending full investigation. Security. The doors opened, and 2 guards entered, their footsteps echoing against marble. Charles resisted for a heartbeat, then sagged as though his bones had given out. They guided him from the room, his career ending with each slow step. The heavy doors closed behind him, leaving only the sound of shallow breathing and the faint hum of the city far below. The betrayal hung over them like a storm cloud. Yet amid the shock and anger, one truth crystallized. Ella Morgan had not only unmasked Harold Shaw's schemes, she had revealed the rot within HaleTech itself. She had seen what even Richard Hale could not bear to imagine. She returned to her seat with quiet composure. Now she said, her eyes sweeping the shaken board, "Let us vote." The tension in the room had stretched to its breaking point. Marcus Thorne raised his hand. "We will proceed to the vote." One by one, voices rang out around the table. Some hesitant, some firm, a few trembling, as they broke ties with Harold Shaw's promise of quick profit. When the count was tallied, the verdict was unmistakable. Ella's motion carried. 25% of HaleTech's profits would be reinvested into research and innovation, the heart of her father's legacy, the future that had been slipping away. For the first time that morning, Ella allowed herself to breathe. Across the table, Shaw's face darkened thunderclouds, gathering where smug confidence had reigned. He shoved his papers back into his case with sharp, angry movements. "This isn't over, Morgan," he spat. "You think you've won, but you've only delayed the inevitable." Ella's voice was cool, unshaken. "Then I suppose we'll be ready for you when the inevitable comes." Shaw glared at her for a long, venomous beat, then stormed out, his attorneys trailing behind him like defeated soldiers. The echo of the doors slamming shut was met with silence. A silence filled not with fear, but with something else, relief. The board members began to murmur, their tone transformed. Some looked at Ella with new respect, others with awe. A few, chastened, avoided her gaze entirely. The tide had turned. In the corner, Vanessa Price sat pale, her mask of arrogance stripped away. Her fingers twisted at the edge of her designer clutch. As the meeting adjourned, she moved quickly to Richard Hale's side, her voice low, almost pleading. "Richard, darling, you see now, don't you? She's impressive. We should invite her to dinner, celebrate, build bridges." Richard turned to her, his eyes no longer clouded by charm or pretense. For the first time, he saw her clearly, the shallow cruelty, the performative glamour, the hollowness that had driven her to destroy someone just to feel powerful. He shook his head slowly. "No, Vanessa, we're finished." Her mouth opened in protest, but the cold finality in his voice silenced her. With a sharp breath, she rose and left, heels striking the floor like gunshots, each step a retreat from the life she thought she had secured. When the room emptied, only Richard and Ella remained. The morning light cut across the table between them. He stood, his shoulders heavy, and faced her. "Ella," he began, his voice rough. "Last night, at the restaurant, I should have said something. I should have stopped her. I failed you not just as the CEO of this company, but as a man." He swallowed the words, dragging out like penance. "I'm deeply sorry." For a moment, Ella studied him, her expression unreadable. The memory of his silence still lingered raw and sharp. But she also saw something different now, regret, humility, and a glimmer of the leader he could be if he chose. "An apology is a start," she said evenly. "But actions matter. This company has work to do. And so do you." The words landed softly, yet with the weight of a challenge. Richard nodded, humbled. "Then let me start today." In that quiet exchange, the war shifted from corporate survival to personal redemption. HaleTech had been saved, but rebuilding its soul and Richard's character would be the true test ahead. Weeks passed and HaleTech began to breathe again. What had once been a boardroom plagued by fear and doubt became a place of renewed vision. Engineers who had walked away returned carrying fresh ideas and excitement. Young talent once poached by competitors lined up to join. The sterile hallways, once weighed down by whispers of decline, now buzzed with purpose. And at the heart of it all stood Ella Morgan, not behind a tray in a restaurant, not hidden by anonymity, but beside Richard Hale, guiding, listening, insisting on innovation over shortcuts. Richard was no longer the man who sat silent in the face of cruelty. Humbled, he became a student of his own company. He walked the labs, shook hands with employees whose names he once forgot, and asked questions that he had never bothered to ask. Side by side with Ella, he began to understand what leadership meant, not pleasing markets, but protecting people and nurturing ideas. One evening, as the sun slipped below the Manhattan skyline, they stood together on the rooftop terrace of HaleTech Tower. The city glowed beneath them windows, like stars scattered across the darkening sky. Richard leaned against the railing, his voice quiet but resolute. "Your plan saved us." Ella turned her hair, catching the last traces of light. A faint smile touched her lips. "Our plan," the word carried weight. Not just shared responsibility, but shared future. For a moment, silence held them. Then Ella lifted her gaze outward across the endless city she had once hidden from. She thought of the 6 months in uniform of carrying trays and bowing her head of hearing Vanessa Price call her unworthy. She thought of the mask she had worn and the fire it had ignited inside her, and she realized something deeper than victory. From waitress to boardroom leader, her journey was never about titles or wealth. It was about choice, about courage, about proving that dignity lies not in what you wear or how others see you, but in what you do when no one is watching. The camera lingers on her hands, resting on the railing hands, once mocked, scarred from childhood, called unworthy. Now steady, now strong, now holding the future of an empire. And as the city hums below, the lesson settles gently like the evening air. True worth isn't measured by appearance or status. It's measured by character, by courage, by how we choose to treat others when we believe no one important is watching. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or silenced, share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next tale that reminds us all, dignity and courage have the power to change everything.